Hey Gainers, so welcome to episode 6. This sort of pop culture. What sort of legacy did Ed Gain leave behind for sort of films, media, and documentaries? I'm here with Larry and Jamie, and we're just going to discuss the pop culture. I'm Ashley from the Isle of Wight, and I'm the creator of Ed Gain in Colour. If you want to introduce yourselves, gents?
I'm Jamie Phillips. I'm from South Carolina. I'm one of the admins of the Ed Gein in Color discussion group, along with the colorization artist.
Larry Gallo. I'm one of the admins in the Ed Gein discussion group. I'm from Michigan.
Right. Cheers, gents. So, should we just fire off with the first 3 popular films that were inspired?
Let's get started.
So, should we start off with Psycho?
Absolutely, since it's kind of the one that kind of birthed this. Psycho was originally written by Robert Bloch in 1958, I believe, is when the book was completed, and it was later turned into a film by the famous director Alfred Hitchcock in 1960. It famously stars Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates and Janet Leigh. The film is loosely based on Ed Gein, although there are some conflicting reports on that. We do know that Robert Bloch, the writer, lived apparently maybe 40 miles away from the Gein farm, and he was writing Psycho during the arrest of Gein when all of his crimes came to light in November of '57. It is reported that the book was mostly finished by the time that Gein was arrested, but I'm not really sure in that regard. But there is definitely some inspiration taken from Gein that we know of, and that's mostly imminent in the 1960 film adaptation.
So, moving on to there's a film called Deranged, and you'll have to go into a bit in depth with this one because I've never seen this.
Deranged came out in 1975, so a year after the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It is a Canadian American film, and I believe the film was actually shot in Nova Scotia. I'm not completely sure. Somebody please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. The film famously stars Robert Blossom. For those of you who aren't familiar with him or his name, you definitely likely remember him from the famous family movie Home Alone. He plays the creepy old man. He's also in the film Christine. He's the one that sells Christine to the character Arnie in that film. But in Deranged, Robert plays a character named Ezra Cobb, and that film is most definitely inspired by Gein, and it is I wouldn't say 100% faithful adaptation, but I don't think it was aiming to be, but it is a very, for the most part, it does some things very accurately, and it has definitely a lot of inspiration. Some things are even recreated from the Gein story, and a lot of people haven't heard of the film, unfortunately, but it's one that I always recommend to horror fans, especially ones who like older films or grittier films. Even a lot of the effects for the film was done by the legendary Tom Savini, and I think Tom Savini actually did some commentary on the film once. And of course, the effects in the film are great, and there's one scene in particular where you will kind of wince up. Not going to spoil it, but for those of you curious to watch the film, your best route would be DVD, or I believe there's actually a 4K release of it now by Scream Factor, but I'm not completely sure. But it's also free on YouTube, but it does have Spanish subtitles. But in my opinion, it's definitely the closest Gein story that isn't a direct Gein related thing. It's not a documentary, and it's not meant to be a true story, but it definitely takes a lot of inspiration.
Okay, so we're probably going on to both your favourite films, Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yep. No introduction really needed for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was written and directed by Tobe Hooper, along with written by Kim Henkel. The film was released in 1974 and has become one of the most famous, recognizable horror films of all time, and in my opinion, one of the most beautiful masterpieces to ever be released. I'm a mega TCM fan, as you can see. The film famously stars Gunnar Hansen, rest his soul. He passed in 2015, who plays the character Leatherface. And there is some Gein inspiration, although it's not nearly as much as a lot of people will try to lead you to believe. Texas Chainsaw is really its own story for the most part, although it does take some inspiration from Gein. And usually, when you watch any documentary about Ed Gein or anything like that, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is pretty much always mentioned, or they'll use photos from the film. And that is but with TCM, what is mostly, I think the reason why people mostly connect it to Gein is through the character Leatherface. In the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface wears three masks throughout the film. The first mask is referred to by fans as the killing mask. That is the mask that he wears throughout the beginning all the way up to close to the end of the film before switching into a grandmother-esque attire, which features what is known as the grandma mask. Then the most probably famous mask of the movie, which you see during the infamous dinner scene and the final chase scene, is known as the Pretty Lady mask. Those masks were made by a very underrated artist named Robert Burns. He created the masks using a mixture of liquid latex and fiberglass, which makes them have a very translucent, realistic, grotesque appearance. They're also from artists that I've spoken to, primarily Colby Jones, aka Sliced Cheese, who is the master at making replicas of these masks in that fashion. Apparently, they are a bit fragile, and you can see that through the first Texas Chainsaw, especially during the Franklin kill, when the character Franklin shines the light on Leatherface and he grabs the saw, and you can see it above his head. You can see where it's actually split among the chin. A lot of artists who recreate those masks using that material say that it does look amazing. It is very realistic, very grotesque, but it is pretty fragile and apparently pretty hard to work with from what I know.
Thanks for that, Jamie. So should we just talk a little bit about the music culture?
Absolutely.
So Gein's had a lot of effect on music, and
I'd say he's had as much effect on music as he has on film. Maybe not as quite, but they are a lot of songs from some pretty well-known artists who have done songs inspired by Gein.
Yeah.
I think probably the most well-known one is the song Dead Skin Mask by Slayer, which comes from their album Seasons of the Abyss. The song is track number 5 on the album, and I believe that album was released in 90 or 91. Somebody will have to correct me. But once that's back during the days where things like that were very shocking. We were past the 1970s satanic panic that Kiss brought on, and we're kind of into the 90s where you get kind of that shock factor into things. At that point, horror had mostly gone into comedy or that kind of self-awareness. Well, most of that came in 94 with Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and especially onwards with films like Wes Craven's Scream. But at that point, horror was kind of more pop culture and mainstream, so you do see music was a lot more shocking back then. For anybody that's listened to the track on Dead Skin Mask, there's a lot of disturbing lyrics to it, especially during the near the end of the song. You get a little girl saying, "I don't want to play anymore, Mr. Gein," and things of that sort, which is really disturbing. You can actually find you can find a lot of people reacting to the song on YouTube, and they're just absolutely gasped which I think is a real testament to that band, because even over 30 years later, that song is still doing what it was designed to do and just scaring the shit out of people.
Yeah. So moving on to films, Silence of the Lambs was a big one. I think.
Yep.
Was that come out in 91 or?
1991.
Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs was a very popular film when it came out. I believe it is actually the only horror film ever nominated for, I believe it was an Oscar, if I'm not mistaken. It famously stars Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, who are both terrific actors and actress. Then you have the character of Buffalo Bill, who I believe is played by Ted LaVey or Levine. I'm gonna have to double check myself because I'm probably mispronouncing that. He also is in the Hills Have Eyes remake that came out in 2006, I believe, or 2005. Very underrated actor, but he plays the character Buffalo Bill, and the character of Buffalo Bill does take some inspiration from Ed Gein, primarily in the skinning of his victims. Buffalo Bill also takes inspiration from another infamous piece of shit, and that's Ted Bundy. But most when people think of Silence of the Lambs, I think of one scene in particular, and that is the Goodbye Horses scene. For anybody familiar with that, where you see Buffalo Bill dressed with the scalp and the dance, and it's really like disturbing and shocking. Something that quite a few people don't notice with that scene on first glance is he's actually wearing somebody's scalp, which once you notice that, it just makes it a whole nother level of disturbing. But that's pretty much the
Yeah,
three biggest. That's pretty much the three films that come up the most when people talk about Ed Gein and documentaries and things of that sort. Is Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs.
yeah. So, just quickly, there's not much to say, but we've got American Psycho to bring up, and I think it's just to. I think there was a quote that was made incorrectly on there.
Yes. There is a scene in American Psycho where they're sitting there, and Patrick Bateman, I believe, is that character's name. He says, "You know what Ed Gein used to say?" And then he says, "When I see a girl walking down the street, I think two things." That's actually not an Ed Gein quote at all. That comes from Edmund Kemper, and for a while, I guess it got confused as an Ed Gein quote, so it just kind of stuck. But American Psycho is obviously a very popular movie, even in 2026. That is a movie that you see constantly referenced. I don't use TikTok personally, but I do know that TikTok edits of that film are extremely popular. So millions of people have heard that quote, and a lot of people now associate that with Ed Gein, even though it has nothing to do with Gein, actually.
So, where are we? House of a Thousand Corpses. And I was really
Nope.
shocked the other day that you said there's two appearances of Ed Gein
Yes.
because I've
House of a
seen
Thousand.
straight through that.
I think House of a Thousand Corpses is some of Rob Zombie's finest work, firstly, but Ed Gein does make two small appearances in that film. The first time you see Gein, he is an animatronic during the scene where Captain Spaulding is taking those our characters through the tour of his attraction, and he's kind of like this animatronic with a cleaver. And they are like shots that are thrown in there of Gein kind of moving around. And fun fact, Ed Gein in House of a Thousand Corpses is played by Bill Moseley, who when you think of Bill Moseley, people think of two things. They think of Chop Top from Texas Chainsaw 2, or they think of Otis Driftwood from, well, House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects. So he doubles as Ed Gein in that scene. And during the scene where they two characters go to rob Spaulding, if you look really close in the background, you see an artwork of Gein, which Larry actually brought up is still apparently in Rob Zombie's personal prop collection.
I'd love to have that.
Yep. Um,
So, I think the last one, just to maybe Larry, you can. I don't want to say it because I'm not a big fan. The Netflix series. Uh, so we're gonna have to touch on this. I know we none of us like the series, um, but come on, tell me why you don't like the series.
Because it's 90% incorrect.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, there's maybe 10% of it that might be close, but everything else is not even close to correct.
no,
So it's a lot of I'll just say BS.
yeah, but
that's
you
putting
did
it kindly.
you did say something that was quite touching. You know how the families are going to feel, especially Bernice Warden's family, because of the way she's been portrayed in that series.
Right.
Just
I thought I had read somewhere, I can't remember where, but the surviving Warden family were very upset at how they portrayed betrayed her. She was not promiscuous like that at all. So that whole thing with her in that series was the furthest from the truth that it could be. So
yeah. So
The
I was going to say, Jamie, you're a bit quiet on the subject. Go ahead, buddy.
I think that's one of the biggest things that I dislike about the Netflix series is it is bluntly disrespectful and downright disgusting with the treatment of victims, primarily Mrs. Warden and Mary Hogan. I do know that, like Larry mentioned, Mrs. Warden does still have surviving family members. I'm not going to say what relation they are, but I do know they are around and they are vocal about these types of things. And I would be too, because in the series, she is portrayed completely wrong, and the events of her death are portrayed extremely wrong, and it's very distasteful. And that's one thing that almost made me stop watching the show entirely, which by the second episode, I was ready to throw my TV out the window. But yeah, like Larry said, I fully agree with him. About 90% of the show is completely incorrect. And the other 10% is, go ahead.
I think just be nice briefly if you want to just briefly talk about Bernice Warden, the real Bernice Warden.
Well, the Bernice, well, it'd be hard to speak on her because obviously I didn't know
Just
this
that
lady.
she was respected, wasn't she, in the community?
I believe her husband had passed in the 1930s. I'm not completely sure. Somebody needs to correct me on that. And she ran the local hardware store in Plainfield. Very respected woman, very well thought of. And her death is something that really struck that town hard because she was a very well respected, very well loved woman and who died unjustly and unfairly. And it kind of hurts because you see that with a lot of media in general, where after a while, real people kind of become characters and they don't even become people anymore. And that's something that I wish wasn't around. I just don't understand how nobody's been sued over that series yet. If they do, I don't feel sorry for them, but that's just my opinion.
Sorry, I just thought it'd be nice just to say a nice few words about her because of the Netflix series. Well, I think that's it, gents. Thank you very much. I know it's really hard to catch up. But I do appreciate this. So, do you want to end it there?
I think we can. As always, I'm glad. Hope you all enjoyed watching, and I hope you guys tune in next time. And as always, remember, it's always family.
Right, cheers, guys. I'll catch you later.
I'll catch you later. Hold on. Shit.